Business leaders know the future is already here. The economy is shifting. Non-humans are entering the workforce. Nothing feels certain. SHRM understands those evolving challenges, both in the workplace and the wider world. In this podcast, we'll bring together authors, researchers, executives, and non-traditional experts to help you take on the challenges others haven't yet considered. Because you don't need to be a futurist, you need actionable insights now. You need to be a Tomorrowist. I'm Jerry Wan. Welcome to Tomorrowistt, where we explore the trends shaping the future of work. We're living in a time when disruption feels constant. Social issues, political polarization, economic uncertainty, rapidly advancing technology. It's not just happening around us, it's happening at work. In the first quarter of 2025, SHRM found that high anxiety about the future of U.S. society is fueling workplace incivility, costing businesses over $1.3 billion in lost productivity every day. For leaders, the challenge is clear. How do you keep teams productive and civil in the midst of disruptive times? Here to unpack this is Jim Link, Chief Human Resources Officer at SHRM. Jim, welcome to Tomorrowistt.
Thank you, Jerry. It's a pleasure to be with you here today.
We're living in a time of intense social, political, and technological disruption. How do you see the stress of those changes impacting work, workers, and the workplace?
Well, Jerry, the answer to that question is really easy. It's impacting in every way, every day. And there are so many things that are happening now across our broader socioeconomic and socio-political environments that, of course, these things are translating down into the workplace. We're seeing them in impacting how people think about the way they work every day, how they're thinking about the work and its association with their home and their broader communities. And I think more specifically, workers are thinking about the future because the things that we're experiencing now are not necessarily conducive to what we've experienced in the past. And so that creates a conflict. And that conflict in particular is something that workers have to learn how to navigate and manage through for the betterment of both themselves, their own sense of well-being, and also their productivity and efficiency and effectiveness at work.
You make a good point because I think, particularly in the post-pandemic era, the line between work and personal life has been blurred forever and it overlaps. And, we see the comical interpretation of it on shows like Severance, where you can literally leave everything at the door when you check into work, but that's not the reality that we live in. And many of us continue to work from home. Many of us share more about our personal lives, our families, our thoughts with colleagues as they turn into friends. And more. And so, these conversations are also evolving at a rapid pace in ways that we have ever seen. And so how can leaders keep the current events, from politics, global crises, from becoming a distraction in the workplace without appearing detached or unsympathetic?
Yeah, the first thing to do is simplify and clarify, because anything that happens in the workplace, believe it or not, can often be viewed as a refuge, a place where people come, where that there is some sense of order, some sense of expectation, some sense of timeliness. There's structure to it. And those types of things are not things that we're seeing right now in our broader society. Matter of fact, the opposite is true. It appears to be unstructured and chaotic and unplanned and perhaps even unpurposeful for many people. So think of work as a place where that you can come to get something done and something accomplished. So we encourage managers and leaders to take advantage of that by being very clear about what the expectations are. And those can be expectations for that day, for that week, for that month, or even that year. But that act of providing structure in as simple and as clear a way as you possibly can has the benefit of providing guidance and stability to a workforce that might otherwise be distracted by what's going on in the broader world around them.
It's a wonderful point. And, we process things differently. And depending on who you are, where you are, what you've been through, what your family looks like, we process what's happening around us differently. Obviously, with the internet, we get news faster than we ever have. We are exposed to more things. And there's certainly no shortage of opinions on the internet of how people view these things and how we are taught to think. And so that results in people coming to work. And again, work isn't just a physical place anymore, but mentally, psychologically, emotionally, people are coming from different places. What are your thoughts on how leaders can promote workplace civility when a variety of employees are coming with very different experiences and often deeply personal ones, reactions to what's happening in the world.
Yeah, well, my answer to that is really tied to one of the central tenets of effective leadership, and that is an empathetic leadership style. So when people walk in off the street to work every day in the way that you have described, you're absolutely right, Jerry. They bring with them everything that is the lived moment for them from the time that they got home the night before. Right? They're walking into an environment now where they're bringing the last hours with them. That's why workplaces need to be receptive and open and flexible and agile and collaborative and cooperative and a whole other list of words that are descriptive of what effective work cultures look like. So when I think about this more broadly, I most envision what an effective workplace should look like as a if you can work with me on the imagery here, a four-legged stool. And one leg of that stool is certainly a culture of learning because people come into an environment where that their leaders are every day, where that their coworkers are every day. They want to do a good job, but they are even more engaged and more excited if they feel like they have the opportunity to develop a skill or a competency or a capability. So that culture of learning is the first important leg in that stool of what that workplace should look like. If you have a culture of learning, the second leg of that stool is easier to generate, which is a culture of innovation. Learning creates innovative and inquisitive minds, and those inquisitive minds, guess what? They generate innovation in an organization. And we all know that because of many of the things you've already mentioned, Jerry, about the speed of technology and capability these days, innovation is going to win the game at the end of the day. So that's the second leg, is a culture of innovation. The third leg of that stool, in which you have learning and the innovation, is certainly to do something with that. And that is a culture of collaboration, right? You have all this competency and all this capability now. So why not collaborate with that? And then, of course, no workplace is complete without focusing on and enhancing a culture of inclusion. So if you think of those four things as a four-legged stool, we know what happens if you sit upon a stool that has one leg longer or shorter than the other, right? You feel unbalanced. But let's assume for a moment in this hypothetical example that you're an employee sitting upon that stool where those four cultural components are clearly in place. Well, guess what? My belief is that the employee sitting upon that stool actually feels like they're working in a culture of care.
Hmm.
And nothing can be more important right now in our society and in our environment, in our workplaces, and in our communities than portraying, demonstrating, and living every day a culture of care for yourself, for your family, for your coworkers, for your community, and for those that you care about. So, to me, that's what leaders should be going after. They should be thinking about that four-legged stool all the time, because if they get that right, those employees sitting upon that stool are going to know where they work in a place where that they're valued, where they're appreciated, where there's a purpose, and where that culture of care gives them the wherewithal, the stamina to get through whatever else they might be bringing into work every day with them.
Well, let's talk about that care, right? Because I think it is a very important topic. And I think it's also something that we've seen about care being brought into the workplace, right? So decades ago, and we can also generalize about the past, it was tough it out. This is work, leave that stuff at the door. And then we've introduced, for good overall, I believe, care in forms of, mental health resources or time away and in different things that have been, introduced. And so where's the right balance, right? Where's the boundary, or how can leaders think about balancing helping employees manage their stress, staying focused, without becoming the therapist or without becoming, something so disruptive to the workplace? How can leaders think about that balance?
I think there are two or three ways to think about that. And the most important, even primary way leaders should respond in these types of situations is to role model the behavior that they wish to see in their employees. If you, for example, if you have a supervisor, a leader, a manager in an organization that's full of drama every day, then guess what? They're going to expect the folks going to work on that, or who are working on that team, are going to believe that it's okay to bring that drama into the workplace every day, right? But if you're a leader who doesn't want to manage the drama, you just want to manage the value and the benefit of the employee and the outcome of that particular employee's situation and employee's productivity, then you're focused on that. So you're, number one, role modeling the behavior that you wish to see in others, particularly those who work with you. The second thing I think is vitally important is to understand that different types of situations require different types of leadership skill and capability. It's called situational leadership. And, the person that walked out the door last night may not be the same person who works for you who walks in the door that morning. You need to be aware of that, and you need to be prepared to adjust your own approach, your own feelings, your own behaviors to reflect what it is that that particular person might be bringing into work on that particular day at that particular time. So that situational awareness and situational realization that things are not the same in anyone's life on any given day from day to day is a big step in that process. And then finally, the third thing I think is vitally important is encouraging employees to utilize the resources which are available to them in the workplace. You're right, Jerry. You mentioned that things have dramatically and radically changed, particularly since the onset of the COVID pandemic 5 years ago. Clearly, employers recognized shortly into that the human capability and what people were able to do was now taking new forms, exciting new forms. We learned the new definitions of flexibility and agility. We learned new definitions of how, when, where, and why work can get done and by whom. All of those things are values which organizations have now incorporated in different ways into their organizations. If we got nothing else out of that time period, we learned very quickly that human beings and the skills, competencies, and capabilities that they bring into a workplace every day are not a commodity. They are a valued, needed resource for organizations to thrive and be successful. And I honestly, there were so many horrible, terrible things that happened during the pandemic, but that's a good thing that came out of that very trying, difficult time period for all of us, was the realization that people and their skills are unique, valuable, and needed for the success of society and for the workplace.
Managers, supervisors, people in the middle of the org chart are often tasked with this impossible dichotomy of dealing with things themselves, putting the organization priorities at the forefront, but also helping their teams manage. And if you're one of these people, we feel for you. We've been there, and it's you're sandwiched in between not letting your personal views or emotions dictate your actions as the manager, and balancing. And not to say that they're at odds, but sometimes they can feel like odds of what is better for or the important for the company or the organization today versus caring for the employee. What's the advice there for the people who feel sandwiched or being pulled on opposite ends to do the right thing and still maintain their position or feel like they're being valued? It can feel like they're being pulled in a number of different directions there.
Well, I'm one of those people who believes that the truth shall be said. So let's start with that. You are 100% right. Those folks are in the middle. They are sandwiched. It's the very definition of middle management, right? You are somewhere in there trying to navigate those folks who work with you, with those people for whom you work. And it's a difficult place, but that place is also a place of learning and clarity. And it's where people who really have significant leadership capability begin to get noticed and be seen because they learn through trial and error, through mistakes and successes. They learn how to navigate and keep all things that need to happen in an organization happening while dealing with those things that could potentially prohibit things from happening. Those are usually people, processes, or as I like to say it, it's talent, tech, and leadership. Those are the three things, right, that are vitally important that those middle managers learn how to navigate. Now, I'm a person who believes that the best organizations are throwing all kinds of resources toward those middle managers. They are providing them with learning opportunities. They're teaching them how to be effective. They're helping to prioritize what's important and what's not important. They're setting expectations. And most importantly, Jerry, I believe they should be rewarding those middle managers in a way that is not only required, but actually enhances and
Mm.
brings even more value through monetary rewards and recognition to those middle managers who are really learning how to navigate in the way that we talked about a little bit earlier.
And so we talked about sort of, balancing those odds. And then there's a couple different angles that I would love to get your take on, which is what if there's uncertainty and you don't know, right? And so maybe there's rumors of, reorgs or a different direction, or you're not sure what the future of the company holds. And that is a different level of anxiety of the unknown rather than being in disagreement with somebody else. What are some communication tools or strategies? And again, this is an impossible position for the middle manager of trying to stay positive and confident and leading while they also might feel their own anxiety about their unknown tomorrow.
There are 3 words that in my mind are not used enough in the leadership ranks, and those 3 words are really simple. They are, "I don't know." It is so important to actually acknowledge with full transparency and the height of your communicative skills and capabilities. When you don't know something, the biggest mistake I see managers, particularly middle managers make, is trying to fake their way through knowing. Right? So that sense of transparency, that candid behavior, all of those types of things, and think about what that does, right? So you're an employee, you go to your boss or leader, that boss or you ask them a very important question, at least it's important for you. It could be about any of those things you mentioned about the future of the company or the future of the person asking the question or whatever. And the you are looking for some broad, deep, know-it-all answer from your boss or supervisor, and that supervisor says to you, "I don't know." Well, there are a couple ways to look at that. One is I would follow up the "I don't know" with the next phrase, which is, "But I'll find out," or "I'll figure it out," or "But I'll get back to you within 24 hours," or, whatever it is. So, that I'm setting the expectation that I'm not a know-it-all type of person, but by golly, where I don't have the answer, I'm going to go out and try to set the expectation to find one for you. So it's just that sense of transparency and authenticity and genuineness that goes so far, even if you don't know the answer or it's an answer that's negative, right? Meaning the employee didn't want to hear that specific answer. When it's delivered in such a way with those characters of authenticity and things related to that, listen, that goes a long way toward building that credibility that we're all looking for. I think of the parent-child relationship sometimes, right? So I'm the father of 4 Gen Zers, right? Oh my goodness, never a dull minute, right? I whenever I need to really know something from my kids, I just text them, right? Instead of having a conversation, because that's their preferred communication style and methodology. And guess what? I can say no just as easily via text as I can in person. I can also say yes or give an affirmative answer just as easily in that manner. And that doesn't devalue the response. It might change the way that the questioner feels about the response, but it is a response. And so many times we try to hide negative or information that we believe will not be well received by the questioner. And honestly, I think that's a mistake. It doesn't build any of those types of things which you need to have in place, like trust whenever you are actually in a situation where you need someone to do something different or you need them to respond urgently or quickly. By just having that transparency, you're already a step ahead of the curve. So those middle managers, Jerry, to answer your question more briefly, that's what I think they should do. They should focus on building that culture of trust by being transparent, admitting when they don't know, acknowledging both successes and failures, becoming a storyteller, talking about their own life's lived experiences, if that's such a thing. Maybe it's just their lived experiences, but talking about those things, it builds that genuineness that goes so much further in the communication relationship between a supervisor and a subordinate.
And I think what you're saying is so important because, what's also changed is the average tenure that most people have at these organizations and whether they stay in the same industry or not, which means that those relationships of trust that you build, whether you are the manager or the employee, they'll stay with you, right? And so I think about the people that I've stayed in touch with long after I've left an organization, and it's because they treated me and the relationship was based on genuine care for me and not seeing me as a commodity or just a widget to get something done, right? And so, and I think when you hear about people leaving organizations, it's because, oh, they treated me a certain way, like I was replaceable, that I wasn't respected. And so, I think a different angle to that advice too is think about the marathon of your careers and lives and not just that very moment, whether that is the challenge. Of course, you have to keep the business a priority, but also don't forget that these human relationships are there for the long run, and you never know. And there's so many stories of people you used to work with, or the person ended up hiring you as a client, or all these things. Jim, the next question you foreshadowed it is that the way we talk about these things, right, about anxiety, about mental health, about even processing information, or how we view showing up authentically to work has changed and will always change based on generations, right? And so the world that you and I grew up in is different than the world that your kids will grow up in. I have kids younger than yours. And so there's been a lot of light banter, if you will, or generalization and, making fun of different generations on how they react to things. What is universally acceptable is that we are talking about a more variety of things at work, including mental health, including things outside work that impact us. Long gone are the days of work versus home being so separate. Um, how can managers and leaders best prepare themselves if they are not in a certain generation, or if they don't have people in their lives that can help them understand how different generations think, without demonizing the other party, without making vast generalizations that ultimately hurt the progress of things? And now, we used to call Gen Z young people, and now they're not. They're in leadership roles. They're starting companies. They are starting to get to the levels of middle and senior leadership. And so, how do you balance that? And what can leaders do listening to this conversation today to sort of level up their understanding of multi-generational leadership?
That's a fantastic question. And I think a lot about generations in the workplace and all of those types of things. And Jerry, a quick story before I answer your question. In the first 15 years of my career, the expectation was very much what you just described when you were setting up the question at hand, which was we were trained and taught a specific way of how we should relate to other people in the workplace. There was a bright line, or certainly a brighter line than exists today, between those things that happen at home and those things that happen at work. There were other things that you never talked about work. You never talked about religion. You never talked about politics. You never talked about any of the other unspeakables, right? Which were disallowed, to be carried on in the workplace. So there was just a bright line and a bright separation. But there was also an expectation during that time period that you would also be less of an empathetic leader because those rules and standards were in place. Perhaps you didn't need to be as much of an empathetic leader because the rules were brighter, the lines were more distinguished, and it was more clear what was allowed and what was disallowed. Fast forward the next 15 years in my career, where I have now, and I'm still doing it, by the way, spending all my time trying to unlearn all of those things that I learned in the first 15 years of my career so I can continue to be an effective leader and hopefully an effective role model for my team and my organization. So there has to be, in the first place, this idea that you are open to learning what are the benefits of managing or assuming some type of responsibility in the role that you're in today.
Mm.
You have to grasp that and understand that you don't know everything. And because you don't know everything, there are people around you who can teach you things that you don't know, can round you out, can make you a better citizen of the current workplace, if you will. And so many leaders and managers today don't really walk into a situation with that kind of a mindset in place.
Mm.
So I encourage leaders to think about how those folks who are walking in the door are similar to them, but also dissimilar to them, be that generational difference or gender difference or whatever other kind of difference we are, and actually grasp that difference as a strategic advantage for you to become a better leader. So you don't lead people who are between the ages of 20 and 25 the same way as you lead people who are between the ages of 45 and 55. But perhaps you do, in the sense that you should be as empathetic, as open, as kind, as caring, and as directive and as purposeful as you need to be as well. I never subscribed to any stereotypes of any generation. Yes, there are things that are generally more observable about these people in any generation, including my own. But there are things, particularly about young folks who are in the workplace today, which are incredibly fantastic. First of all, they are digital natives. There are things that they can teach every other generation that's more senior than them in the workplace about the value, the role of technology, and how it can be used to enable better work outcomes, more productivity, more effectiveness, more efficiency, what have you. The second thing is, and we know this not just in my own home, but there are research studies that back this up, that yes, the preferred methodology of communication is technological, right? So digital communication with folks who are younger in the workplace today. But when it's really important, they still want to talk to you face to face.
Mm.
And we as leaders, more seasoned leaders in the workplace, need to grasp those opportunities because it's at that moment in time when we have the opportunity to tell our stories, to show our authenticity, to build that connectivity and that collaboration in ways that, because we're more senior, we're also more used to, while not disregarding those capabilities and skills and preferred communication methods to those people who are likely younger in the workplace. And Jerry, my final part of this I'll just tell you about is organizations have to change the way they think about talent in the workplace today. Yes, there are more jobs than there are people available. There are more skills required than there are skilled people to fill those jobs. And that is changing even more rapidly now with the advent of technological advances in the workplace, particularly generative AI. That's not going to change. There's no situation with even the most advanced technology that's going to fill that skills gap that's going to exist without impacting our broader global economic situation, let alone perhaps even to the level of domestic gross GDP in select countries throughout the world, including our own here in the United States. So we have a once in a lifetime unique opportunity to capture all of the capabilities that exist across generations, across our workforce, across the beauty of the diversity that are the people that make up the environments in which we live and work today. We should not squander that. Instead, we should make it our goal and our ambition to be after those things and realize the unique, important value that every human being brings into the workplace. And it's true. Not everybody's going to fit in every situation at any given point in time. And the quicker we as businesses and organizations are comfortable with the idea that we should be net exporters of talent and not net hoarders of talent, the better the better off we're going to be, because we'll build the infrastructure and the processes and the methodologies to make that a fact. Because let's face it, you're right, those tenures are shorter. People are not going to stay longer because we ask them to. They're going to stay longer because they feel valued and appreciated, and that there's something there in the tomorrow for them. And it's up to us as managers and leaders to build that case.
Wonderful. As we near the end of this conversation, I want to ask you a very practical one. In a few weeks, and maybe this will have passed depending on when you're listening to us, you and I will join, 20,000 of our friends and colleagues and be in San Diego for SHRM 25. Given the ways that we work and given the things that are changing, gathering in that place with many people across days of events and, education and learning will also mean that people might be interacting with people with different values, with different opinions, and maybe some people who haven't seen each other in a long time. We're asking people to come and learn together, of course, but it's particularly with all the things that are going on, through the lens of civility. What's the advice for, maintaining civility you might pop into a circle conversation where somebody says something that you don't agree with, or, it happens in large group settings. But this being SHRM 25, and obviously we want folks to have positive experiences, relationships, and walk away with inspiration and education. What do we want to tell our folks coming to San Diego with us soon on how to prepare and also react when, so that we can all remain civil and friends at the end of the day?
Yeah, well, just like in our society today, and I know it's a little hard to believe that this is true, but civility is still the norm, and civility is still the expectation. And that representation of civility is best shown through mutual respect, understanding that the person who's speaking their opinion, it's not a requirement that you disagree with them. In fact, it's a requirement that you listen to understand. And then third, I think the most important thing is that everyone comes to their beliefs, their opinions, their ideas, what they wish to vocalize, what they don't wish to vocalize, through a set of circumstances and situations that led them to those conclusions. I never, and I encourage anyone attending our conference coming up to ever assume that they understand where that person came from, what that person is living at that moment in time, and how those beliefs were formed by that person. It only matters that when that person is expressing that opinion, whether we agree with it or not, that we give them the space to express that opinion. That's called freedom of expression. That's what we do. Now, it has to be delivered without profanity. It has to be delivered within the rules of normalized society. But at the end of the day, we want people saying what it is that they understand to be true. We can learn from that. We are not going to set up a situation where we're going to have people, throwing rocks at each other. We're just not going to do that. Instead, we're going to set up situations where you may hear things and learn things which you may not immediately agree with, but now you've been privileged to hear another perspective. And that in itself is civility. So let's be respectful, let's be kind, let's remember that everybody has a point of view, and let's give them the space and the opportunity to share that point of view within the boundaries of civilized society.
A wonderful, words of wisdom and encouragement. Hopefully, you're listening to us before San Diego, and you're going to join us and come up to us and say hello, and we can have a wonderful, civilized discussion. Of course, Jim. As we wrap here, we've talked about a lot today, and I think I myself am walking away from this conversation with a little bit more knowledge, with a little bit more perspective, and an optimism as we navigate these and like. We say too much, but unprecedented, challenging times. What is the one thing leaders can do today to build a more engaged, resilient, and workplace for tomorrow?
Get up from your machine, get up from your desk, get up from whatever it is that's holding you back, and go out there and engage in a civil conversation with a person that works with you and surprise them in what you ask them. Don't ask them how efficient they are today, how effective they are today. Ask them how they're doing today, and then take the time to stand around and listen to the answer. It starts that simply.
Wonderful. Well, Jim Link, thank you so much for sharing your ideas, your wisdom, and your stories with us. Looking forward to spending time with you and the rest of our 20+ thousand best friends in San Diego shortly. And, I guess, like we've talked about for the last half hour, there's more that actually brings us together. There are more commonalities, more shared values and stories. And the only way to uncover what really seems to make us different is through conversation. And so thank you for joining me for this conversation on Tomorrowistt, Jim.
Thanks, Jerry.
SHRM.